one of the things that I think we want to try to communicate about is what we said in front of the whole congregation is, we're doing this national search, we're getting all these resumes, there's piles and piles of resumes and just all these different candidates. And then when we come to say, here's our candidate, it's somebody who was here before we got any resumes. And that may be kind of like head cocking, like, really, Lloyd, internal? So I want to say a couple things about that in relationship to it. Part of it is, if you're in the business of hiring, you already know this, that you can get 1,000 resumes, and it's still likely that only about 10 of them will be worth calling. So we're really only talking about, Lloyd and 10 other possible candidates, or 12. And I invited Lloyd. Lloyd and I talked about this when we were already down to 10. So I knew what he was comparing to and whether or not he was in the ballpark, and we knew that he was. And so he and I actually met, and I talked to him about what that looked like, and then he was able to pray about that before he made his official decision to join the search, because I knew he was going to be in a set of what we were looking at. The other thing too to recognize is there's this whole question of internal versus external candidate, because when you get an internal candidate, there are some real benefits of having somebody who's already a part of your church. You know that they're not a workman. You know that this is a person who already loves this church, already cares about this church. And it's important to recognize you're also talking about somebody who knows the chemistry and culture of your organization, which is really important. And Lloyd doesn't just know the culture and organization of our church generally, but he's been in the inside of the elder board for a few years now. And he knows me pretty well because he's been working closely with me. He was part of my calling in terms of being on the search committee. He was one of the first people from High Point Church ever to meet me. And so he's got a sense of whether or not he can work within the culture of the staff team that I lead. And want to be on the elder board that I'm on. So, but the thing is, the liability then is, okay, wait, if we don't get an external candidate, what about all that fresh vision and all that stuff that's supposed to come in and like bring us forward and stimulate new thinking and all that? And here's why I think we sort of get both with Lloyd. That is, because Lloyd is theologically trained at Wheaton, but coming out of the business world and has an MBA from Kellogg, one of the better business schools in the country, we get a guy who's theologically educated, trained in terms of organization and leadership on the highest business level. So he and I both have studied leadership, but from totally different books, totally different sources, totally different mentors. So when we come together to talk about leadership and then try to develop that and preach and teach and lead out of that, we're coming from totally different resources and can nourish one another. So I think we are going to get a lot of fresh perspective. And that really came across in the interviews with Lloyd. But at the same time, we also are getting the benefits of an internal candidate. And I'm really excited about that.
Me as well.
Do you want to say anything about that?
I think I do. Nick talks a little bit about us coming from totally different perspectives. And some of that is really true. But both of us have a real strong passion for things like leadership. Both of us have a strong passion to read on things like theology, the church generally, and how to administer it. So there's a lot of things that we have in common. He likes Jim Collins as an author. I love Jim Collins as an author. He likes Patrick Lencioni as an author. I'm starting to get more and more familiar with his work and to be able to use it even in the business world, which is where he's from. And so there's a lot of synergies that we have as well.
We both prefer Millard Erickson's systematic theology.
Yeah, that's very true. We both prefer Millard Erickson's systematic theology. We've even had some of the same professors in school. So there is a lot of synergies for us to grow from as well.
Okay, so one of the next questions to look at is the question of, so Lloyd hasn't ever been, so I'm going to paint Lloyd as the worst possible candidate, and then I'm going to explain why that's not a good way to look at it, okay? So here we do a national search, and we get a guy who's never been in full-time ministry, and, for our big hopeful associate pastor candidate, and, what are we doing? And the answer to that question has to do with we were not searching for a general associate pastor. We weren't looking for somebody who had general pastoral qualifications, a general education, and generally liked to people and pastor people. We got a lot of those applications of very qualified, talented, godly men. What we were specifically looking for is an associate pastor of development, somebody who could develop systems and organization and could also develop people. And to find somebody who we really believe could do both of those things, that could be task-oriented, organizationally focused, think in terms of the organization of structures that scale for different sizes and all of that, and be able to then flip a switch and sit down with a real person and actually mentor them in how to do ministry and how to follow Christ and how to understand the scriptures. Whether that's an intern, whether that's a leader in the church, whether that's a staff member, that is not a lot of people have that capacity to do both those things. And it made our list of possible people very thin. And Lloyd was one of the only people that we really believed could do both of those things. And one of the only people we talked to that we believed could do the organizational side. And so because of that, we believe that because of the particularities of this position and the specifics of Lloyd's training and competencies and background and successes and so on, we believe that those two specifically fit with each other the best. So if you're kind of quizzical about, well, why didn't we just get a good associate pastor? Well, we did, but we chose one specifically for what we were doing. And I would rather have a candidate who I know is successful in something slightly different but very similar than to hire somebody who wasn't very successful in something and have him do the same thing and hope all of a sudden he's going to become dramatically more successful. So we don't know all the implications of Lloyd joining our team. No team ever knows that when they pick a player. But we're excited about the potential, and based on what we know we need, we think we're going to get that in him. You want to comment on that?
Maybe.
How fabulous you are? Just tell him.
I think what I'm most comfortable about this job is the leading people aspect of it. We have a staff. Pastor Nick spends a lot of time teaching and preaching. That requires a lot of preparation. And beyond that, then he's got people that he needs to meet with, counsel on a regular basis. I'm here to help administer the church, to make sure that our staff people are being properly developed, to look after our youth and children's ministries, to help our worship ministry thrive, to be a support for our diaconal ministries. And you should know that in 20 years of leadership, I'm very comfortable with that aspect of this assignment, developing people. I feel like that's what I've been doing. And in the business world, you can develop people in Christ. I mean, I have done that. Taught people not only how to sell insurance, but also how to live in Christ, at American Family. And so I'll bring that experience to what we do here at High Point. There's no doubt about that.
And I think that God has everything in your life that you've done up until now has prepared you for this. Don't you?
Yeah, I do believe that this isn't a happenstance, that theological training, just my volunteer service in the church for now decades, and then my business training has allowed me to be the right kind of leader to support Nick in advancing High Point's mission. I really do believe, I'm 100% confident in that. Nobody would have to convince me of that.